Uhuru, brothers and sisters and comrades. This is Chairman Omali Shatel. I'm chairman of the African People's Socialist Party, and I'm leader of the Uhuru movement in the International African Revolution. Today, I wanted to talk to you about something we've been talking about in various ways over the last several weeks. And it has to do, of course, with how the crisis of the whole social system, especially as it's represented in the United States, but not exclusively based on the United States, how it's unfolding. And this crisis is making many challenges for various people. And it has led to the situation where the question of voting rights for African people is something that is tenuous, whether or not Africans will be able to vote moving forward. We know some things about the history of the struggle for African people to vote inside the United States, but perhaps we don't know enough. Perhaps we don't know enough about what voting is all about, and perhaps we don't know enough about who the hell we are and what it is that we should be fighting for. So we have titled this discussion, Voting Rights Act Under Fire by White Power. Voting Rights Act Under Fire by White Power. What next? And the reason we would have something titled like this is because there's an article, I think, in yesterday's New York Times asking the question of whether or not the Supreme Court was about to gut the Voting Rights Act. And then there's another article called Stolen Election Myth Fuels the Republican push to change voting laws. And some of you know that subsequent to the last election that Trump decried as fraudulent, said it was stolen from him, that he really won the election, that preceded and followed the January 6th assault on the US Capitol, that saw these courageous representatives of US white powers scurrying for cover, trying to get out of the way of this group, this throng, this mass of white people, the settlers, the colonizers, who actually attacked that institution that the US loves to hold up as representative of this greatest democracy on the planet Earth. And so everybody saw that. And while everybody, so many people were tempted to characterize this as just something that was done by Trump and by a handful of Trump followers that often are referred to as his base in some loose way. This is part of an attempt to obscure the reality, again, that Trump had just about 2/3 of the vote of white people who voted in the last election went to Trump, 2/3, 57%. And that's similar to the number who voted for him that got him elected in 2016. And it's telling because it makes a statement about American politics more than it does about Donald Trump, or more than it does about the mob that attacked the Capitol, or at least as much about Trump, as much about that mob, much about the sentiment of the colonial settlers, white people in this country, as it does by any single individual or handful of individuals who would attack the Capitol. So this question is up for grabs now. Again, the question of African people being able to vote, just having the right to vote. And what we want to do is make sure that we don't allow this discussion to obscure some very basic and fundamental things about voting at all. First of all, we want to say this, that the electoral process, that is to say, the ability of people in the United States to go to a poll and choose who's going to represent them is a farce. When Trump said that it's rigged, he was absolutely correct when he said it's rigged, because only thing the electoral process does, again, I'm saying this again, and I hope I'm being heard, it offers a nonviolent contest arena, a nonviolent arena for this nonviolent contest between contending, that is to say, sectors of the white ruling class that are at odds with each other over control of the state, the ability of, that's the state, of course, being the real apparatus that runs things, the military, the secret police, the local domestic police, the prison system, the courts, the school systems, all those things constitute what we call the state. In some instances, the state is not even visible, but in others, the state is visible. And it's characterized, like as the Supreme Court, that's now looking at this issue. And of course, you can see the relationship between the Supreme Court and this contest for controlling the state that we talked about, that we call elections in this country, because people were able to see the struggle over the last at least couple of Supreme Court justices, and how it all revolved around their fidelity to the political party, their fidelity to colonialism and things like that. So it's not this innocent entity that stands above the fray, above the political fray, and that somehow that will resolve all these outstanding questions and contending questions in some neutral way that will guarantee that the people will have justice that is not contaminated by particular kinds of economic and political interests. That's been the lie that's been told, but anybody who's been watching the electoral process over the last period knows better. And the fact of the matter is that this Supreme Court that's hearing this question about voting rights today, the Chief Justice Roberts is somebody who argued against voting rights when he was a part of the administration of Ronald Wilson Reagan, who was, if one would allow me to say, like the first Trump. Here we have a B-grade movie actor who became president of the United States. It was put in place, etc. And Roberts is somebody who worked in his administration, the guy who's the Supreme Court Chief Justice right now, that's hearing this case around whether African people should have the right to vote. And he argued against that when he was a part of the Reagan administration, saying that it should not be so easy for Africans to actually utilize this Voting Rights Act in order to win some kind of justice and relief, or to control how votes are counted, or how the election process is being monitored. And so this is what we're looking at. And so we say, what next? What's going on? What is the issue of the Voting Rights Act? And first of all, I just want to say that for some people, this question of the Voting Rights Act is so far removed from our memory that we may not have a good grasp of its significance for the right for African people to vote. Sometimes it seems like one of those esoteric things that's sort of left over from the Trump era. And here are some unnice, unkind, or nasty people who are dabbling again with the threat to our right to vote. When the fact is, of course, we see that virtually so many, I think it may be as many as 40 or more states in the United States right now that are tampering with the voting rights law in those particular states. And what's before the Supreme Court right now is a case revolving around Arizona. Arizona is one of the places that was covered by the Voting Rights Act because of what Arizona and some others meant to stifling the ability of Africans and non-English speaking people to participate fairly in the electoral process. So we're talking about a process, first of all, again, that wasn't set up for us. The electoral process was not set up for us. It was not supposed to represent us. And it was only after the Civil War, the war between contending sectors of white power in this country that cost so many lives and that formally ended slavery, that African people were finally able to vote. And because the Civil War was won by the Republican administration at the time under Abraham Lincoln, the majority of African people who registered to vote at that time registered as Republicans. So the majority of African people were Republicans for a long time because the Republican Party represented the organization, the party that led to the end of slavery. This is where we were located. And this is how were represented. In fact, for a while, for something like 11 years at least, Africans appeared to enjoy some modicum of freedom, elected to really important offices. Actually became part of the apparatus, the international apparatus of the United States in terms of its what do you call it, diplomatic corps, and various other kinds of things like that. I think even Frederick Douglass may have been the ambassador of Haiti. So there seems to be this real thing that might be offering possibilities for Black people through the right to vote. And then, of course, what occurred is because American politics is American politics, because America itself is a country that was founded, first of all, on stolen land of the indigenous people, land, and all the indigenous people. When we say the indigenous people, we're talking about the people who are called Indians, who are living in these concentration camps called Indian reservations and suffering there. We're talking about the Mexican people. This is a part of the whole of what the America is, what the United States is. And so we have this setup, the American setup, that was supposed to be the democratic setup, and of course in 1918, with the election of 1876, no, I'm sorry, 1876, after something like 11 years following the Civil War, this contest between these contending sectors of the white power, the white ruling class, almost broke out in the open again after the Civil War. This is 11 years after the Civil War. And the Republican Party had stolen the election, and the Democrats were threatening to initiate a civil war again. This was the reality, hostile, tense reality inside the United States at that time. And the Republican Party agreed to make a deal with the Democratic Party that if in fact you would allow our guy to become the president, the Republican to become the president, despite the fact there's all kind of evidence that we stole it, that we misused the electoral college, the electoral vote process to take this election. If you allow the Republicans to come to power, what we will do is remove those troops who are in the South. This was called Reconstruction era. Reconstruction was this process that was supposed to be used that would make a decision about what it would take for the South to re-enter into the Union of the United States. And it would provided federal troops to protect Black people who lived in the South. It allowed African people to get elected and, as I said, become office holders, et cetera. And so for some, there seemed to be this great movement ahead through the electoral process. We could vote, we could do all these things. And then they made a deal behind our backs. And the Republicans said that they would remove federal troops, and they did. So when the Republic, it was called the Tilden-Hayes Compromise. And so when they made this deal and the Republican became president, and they then removed the federal troops from the South that were ostensibly there to protect African people. We saw the unleashing of organizations like the Ku Klux Klan, just escalated terrorism being waged against African people in this country. All of this happening, in this great democracy, all of this happening within this context of freedom and electoral process, providing freedom, the whole issue of how there's this peaceful transfer of power that happens from one party to the other. This is what we were dealing with, and then they unleashed this terror on African people. And it was brutal. I mean, many Africans fled the South and went to other places and created sometimes all Black cities, trying to run from the white murder, the white terror that was being imposed on us. And what's really important for us to understand, that white people are colonizers. They're not just colonizers, they are settler colonialists. They are people who left their own countries and came to the United States. And they settled here, unlike colonialists who have done in different times in the past, where they go to a country, they steal the resources, they ship the resources back to what they call the mother country, but they had no intentions of staying there. In this instance, the white people, the settlers, the colonizers who came here, they decided they were going to settle here and that they were going to take the resources for themselves as opposed to sending them back to England or to some other power like that. And so they fought a war around this question of who was going to take and keep these resources. And this is a part of what led to the establishment of what is now known as the United States. And this is the setup that came about it with the Constitution, the rights of the people to choose who was going to represent them. And then, as I mentioned earlier, this struggle that blew up in the face of the country and the rulers of this country that led to the Civil War. And then the Civil War, which was ostensibly in views of many people to end slavery, then saw the deal between the contesting sectors of the white ruling class that said, we can get along together, we can get along, we can make this deal, but it comes at the expense of the freedom and rights of African people, who, this is the point, where the war was waged against us, the right to vote, all these things in the South disappeared, the so-called Jim Crow system, the ability to lock Africans up in prisons, the whole new prison system really emerged from this process that saw Africans that shipped into the prisons. So this is what we're looking at. And this was something that happened in 1876. And like I said, 11 years after the end of the Civil War. So since that time, African people struggling, trying to win freedom. And then what we saw later on, of course, was the magnificent movement that was led by Marcus Garvey. And he was not the first person who understood that African people had to be self-governing. They had to have our own self-government. That's the only way we will ever be able to have freedom and guarantee anything for ourselves, an economy for ourselves, the well-being for ourselves, the well-being for our children, and dignity for ourselves as a people. This was the struggle that emerged. And when this struggle emerged, and 11 million Africans from all around the world, because we were colonized and still are colonized all over the world, either directly or indirectly, when this struggle emerged, it shook up the whole capitalist system. And it shook up the colonizers all over the world, and they were all gunning for Garvey. And the United States, of course, framed up Garvey, in fact, used the struggle against Garvey to integrate the FBI, because they needed somebody Black who could join the Garvey movement, who could snitch from the Garvey movement, who could act as a provocateur and help to destroy the Garvey movement. And then, of course, all around the Garvey movement were these other Africans who one might call civil rights people, who actually didn't believe, who loved America so much despite all the contradictions, who like to talk to us about the great promise of America, despite the lynchings, the murder, the burning, the brutality, the rape, the pillage that we were suffering. You had these forces, and they were opposed to Garvey, because Garvey was talking about having our own government and not relying on the US government that was a slave government, that was a colonial government. And so this is the context within which this movement began to crystallize, that was against, that actually was able to come out against African people being independent and free. And the liberal sector of the white ruling class united with that movement and promoted those forces as leaders. That's where you get people like W.E. Du Bois. As brilliant as he was, he functioned as somebody who worked against the aspirations of our people for total liberation and freedom. So now here we are. This struggle has been going on. So with the defeat of the Garvey movement, the movement, the struggle took a defensive posture. With Garvey, people were aggressively moving to have our own freedom. The slogan, Africa for Africans at home and abroad. It wasn't a slogan that, please, Mr. White Man, can we sit on the toilets next to you? Will you allow us to do this and that? We were saying we have the ability to do it ourselves. We were creating industries. We were doing all the kinds of things that signal people who were going to be self-governing, and actually were having elections, set forth a declaration of rights for the Black people of the world. This is what the Garvey movement did. It created all kinds of institutions. It raised up the dignity of African people. We had these symbolic things like our own military force, like Black, the nurses corps, and things like this. This was coming from Garvey movement, and it stretched across the globe. And this was the threat. They crushed the Garvey movement. that was an offensive movement. And then what follows in the Garvey movement is the civil rights movement, which is a defensive posture. That's no longer talking about how we're going to have our own freedom, but how we can get along, how we can merge in the freedom, in the system of the government, of the society of those that are oppressing us. And this is how that contest stood. And so we had the civil rights folk participated in mobilizing all kinds of African people, working class people, poor people who lived in the countryside, who were not much better than functioning as peasants on the land and things like that. And so this is the process that came out of that. People wanting to be free and then trying to find the vehicles to be free. And then now we, instead of having the leadership that was going to take us to our own freedom, to our own government, we now have this leadership that says that what we have to do is prostrate ourselves and become accepted by the government of the oppressor, by the colonizers. This was the civil rights movement. But the civil rights movement was also characterized by its own differentiations. And there was a sector of the civil rights movement that was active and that was mobilizing African people, engaging in things like civil disobedience and trying to win African people to struggle to change the law so that they would benefit us and we can have the right to vote, not by simply passing, not by simply going to court, but actually taking to the streets, actually jamming up the system in a certain way so that there appeared to be some kind of consequences if the system did not meet our demand to be included in the colonizers' world. This is what we saw. And this pushed the bourgeoisie, the rulers, the colonial rulers to a defensive posture. But the other thing that it did was it educated masses of African people, poor people, who engaged in this process. And this was the process that was something that was to benefit the ruling class, a sector of the ruling class that's now known as liberals, and a sector of the African petty bourgeoisie, a middle class, who saw their future with that of this sector of the ruling class, who now had a movement that taught us to suffer all kinds of injustices, brutalities, bombings, shootings, and horrors imposed on us non-violently, because we were going to show America its own soul, and it would see how bad it was treating us, and it would do something different. But that was a position that that saw millions of African people disgusted by what the terror of white people, and didn't know exactly what to do. And then Malcolm X was one of those forces who struggled against that whole line, that whole politic, and tried to educate masses of people that we need to be fighting for our own power. And in this process, what we saw is that the US government waged this war against this sector of the movement again. First, Garvey. Now, those of us who were talking about self-determination, talking about Black power, talking about African people being in charge of our own affairs, then we became the target again of the government. So the government did things like create these programs, these counterinsurgency programs, to kill our leaders and to jail thousands of African people who stood for Black power, who stood for freedom and dignity of Black people, and not having to crawl on our knees and bellies to be able to get the approval of white people and white power to be free and to live dignified lives. And so this is part of what happened, and this movement came under assault and by white power again, just as the Garvey movement had come. And with this, just as in the era of Garvey, the attack on this sector of the movement elevated another sector, that sector of our movement that would be satisfied just with being able to live with white people and live on the terms that they established for us, if we could learn how to do that. And that's the thing that has occurred. And now, of course, what we see is that this system is experiencing a severe crisis, because it's not only African people in the United States who want to be free, and people around the world want to be free. The whole world is gripped by this white power that became white power as a consequence of slavery and colonialism, as a consequence of stealing people's land, stealing people's resources, and bringing those resources and that land to benefit white power, white people. This is how their communities has grown. This is where their universities come from. This is where their beautiful cathedrals come from. This is where their paved streets and clean water comes from. At the expense of Africa, at the expense of the Africans, at the expense of the Mexicans, at the expense of the other indigenous people here, and at the expense of all the other peoples around the world. This is what happened. So to the degree that people begin to fight back, they challenge this whole stability of the whole system itself. It can't easily feed all those parasites who've been now living at our expense, because the people are taking back the resources to the extent that we can. So there are a lot of people, and so the system begins to crack down. And it's cracking down on the rights of African people to vote. They didn't intend for us to be able to vote. And the fact is that this is a time in history that our movement has the ability to take the revolutionary struggles, the revolutionary concepts, the revolutionary philosophy into the electoral process. And this is a dangerous thing for the social system. That's what the meaning of the African People's Socialist Party having candidates in St. Louis right now who are running for election in the different wards there. That's what it means for African People Socialist Party to have candidates in St. Petersburg, Florida in 2017, 2019, that for the first time in history put reparations on the ballot. They killed Malcolm to keep reparations from getting on the ballot. They killed members of the Black Panther Party, members of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, so these issues could never surface and the masses of African people could have an opportunity to vote on that. You don't vote, they don't have a reparations vote on there. And if they do ever put reparation on the ballot, it's going to be something that they have neutered, they have emasculated, they have undermined to such an extent that it'll only be another welfare program by another name. So this is the situation that we are confronted with right now. And the thing that's really problematic about all of this is that, the leadership that's been left us, for the most part, and with the exception of the African People's Socialist Party, has been leadership that has been content with trying to find a way to live inside the system that oppresses us. Now, I just want to say quickly a couple of things, and I'm pressing the time issue here. That for me, the Voting Rights Act and the issue of voting rights is not just some abstract question. I mean, I was involved in this struggle. That's why I feel competent and unapologetic about criticizing what it means. I was involved in the struggle. I was in Madison, Florida in 1960s when, and all you had as the organizers for voting rights. It's really interesting because I worked for indirectly this guy, Vernon Jordan, who just passed away, because he presided over this voter education, voter rights project. And I worked for John Dew, who was a lawyer, an incredible civil rights guy at the time. And he was responsible for voter registration and education for African people in the state of Florida. And I was responsible for 6 counties in the state of Florida. And they included Alachua County over near Gainesville, where they tried to put me in jail for registering African people to vote. And also in Madison, Florida, where only thing you had is a phone number, a contact person, and riding around in a raggedy Volkswagen trying to get from city to city, county to county to register people to vote. And I was in Madison County, Madison, Florida. And it was something like out of a horror movie almost. When you ride into a town at 3 o'clock in the morning and you don't know how to get to your contact, and the only thing you have is a phone number, and the only thing that's open is this on the side of the highway is this a joint like a service station that serves also like as a general store. With the typical group of tobacco chewing, whittling white people sitting around doing whatever they do, discussing with each other, and a phone booth just a few yards away from them. And I pull up to the phone booth because I got to call this sister so that she can come out and meet me and lead me to her house. And I get in the phone booth, and then while I'm talking to her, I look up, and the phone booth is surrounded by these white people. And they don't have any good intentions in their eyes at all. But they're scared. They're scared because they don't know who I am. Because there's this new Negro, if you will, that's emerged, that's shown up, that's being written about and talked about all over the country and around the world. It's not what they perceive supposed to be, this timid African who just bow down and shuffle for them. And so I'm in the phone booth, and I look up and I see them all. I've called a sister. She's already told me she's going to be driving down the highway to meet me. I say a highway, but it's more like a paved road that runs straight through the middle of the area of Madison. And what I did, of course, it was I clenched my fist to my side and I kicked the door open and just brazenly walked through them as if I was the one who was doing the intimidating. I guess I did do an aspect of intimidation. I ended up being able to get to my car and then ride up and down and then meet the sister who took me to her house where I was to begin this process of voter education and registration there in Madison. What I'm saying this is that this question was not just some abstract issue that you may have heard about or read about it, but they were killing us. They killed Calvin Best, who was all from up in Tallahassee, who they murdered him, a SNCC member who in Mississippi. They were killing us, and this was the terror that was being waged against us in this democratic America. And this is something that should be understood. This is what we are contending with on a regular basis. So now they are talking about doing everything they can to keep African people from voting. And of course, we reject that. And we say we do whatever is necessary to push that back, to be able to maintain the ability to vote. But we only do this because we recognize that voting is only one form of struggle. And it's a form of struggle that should be something that takes us to a higher level of struggle. It should be something that we use to raise the contradictions of society and help the people understand that the system can't solve the problem. That the only way the problems can be solved is that African people have to become politically independent. That we have to be able to feed, clothe, and house ourselves. And the masses of African people all around the world have to be mobilized to take that on. That's the project that's going to liberate us. That's the project that they tried to crush in the 1960s when they were killing us all around this country. That's the project they tried to crush when they attacked the Garvey movement. They care about us being able to vote sometimes. Sometimes they don't give a damn about whether we vote or not, because the fact is that you end up voting for nothing and nobody. So what we have to do is have the ability to use this apparatus, because we do not allow them to monopolize any sector of the democratic space. We wherever we can, we take up the democratic space to put forth anti-colonial, anti-capitalist agenda before masses of people. This becomes a part of the process of training the masses of people to be able, African people, to be able to understand what our own interests are and to be able to overthrow this relationship that we have with white power, with colonialism. That's what it's all about. And so while the Supreme Court is not going to do us any favors, and we are in a very bad and precarious situation if our strategy, if our philosophy, our strategies and philosophies that rely on a solution to our problem coming from the system itself, because the Supreme Court, like the Congress, like every other institution in this country, they are colonial Supreme Courts. They're colonial Congresses. And the problem that we see happening in this country today is when the colonial Supreme Court, the colonial Congresses, the colonial economy does not seem to be benefiting the majority of white people in the same way that it has traditionally. The white people don't move to get rid of colonialism, they move to get rid of their problem. And their problem is another sector of the white population, or the white of the ruling class, that stands between them being able to suck all the blood from Africa, from the masses of people around the world. We have to have our own strategy. We have to have our own philosophy. We have to have our own revolutionary organization to take our power over our lives. That's what the African People's Socialist Party is about. And that's why we plan to govern. So, we running candidates, as I just said, right now, St. Louis is a part of the struggle that we are waging to govern. You should go to African APSPUhuru.org so that you can read up on these candidates and see how you can intervene in this process. Because what you see is there's motion throughout this country. And there are settlers, colonialists, who are pushing forth bills and legislation in all the state houses and many of the state houses throughout this country, the majority of the state houses, that are designed to restrict the ability, the right to suppress the vote of African people. So what they're saying is they're trying to make it impossible for African people to win anything that approximates freedom and power through the voting process. Now, I sympathize with the need that many people experience in terms of fighting back. And yes, we fight back against that, but we do not rely on success of the system to solve the problem, the system that causes the problem to solve the problem for African people. We have to be in the process, as the African People's Socialist Party is in the process of constructing our own system that negates the power, negates the authority of white power so that we can be a free and independent people across the planet Earth. That's what we are about. That's why we must understand this question. Yes, it's a serious issue what the Supreme Court is doing. But the greater issue, the most serious issue is to have Black leadership that will have us to continue to rely on this white power. Because the fact of the matter is that you don't know when they will come in the night. You don't know when they will be unleashed and will attack our people. You don't know when they will even begin to have mass roundups of African people, even people having this kind of discussion. You see all the evidence that they're willing and prepared to do that. So leadership that does not prepare us to go beyond what this system permits, what this system tolerates, that's traitorous leadership. That's no leadership that works for us. And I don't care if it calls itself left wing, right wing, or whatever the hell it calls itself. We have to be organized to carry out our own mission. We have to define that mission. We have to say that we have a responsibility to ourselves. We have a responsibility to our children. We have a responsibility to all of those who've gone before us throughout the African world to be free and to be self-determining. We have to take that power because nobody's going to give it to us in an electoral process or anything else. So that's what I wanted to say. Let the Supreme Court move. You move as you will. We will try to organize wherever we can to oppose what the Supreme Court is doing. But in opposing the Supreme Court, we will expose the Supreme Court as nothing but another extension of the colonial capitalist state that is designed to keep African people oppressed, to keep us unfree, to keep us under the boot of white power. We will expose it while we are doing this, and we will construct our own freedom. And that is, we will become a self-governing people all around the world, as we are doing now. In various places of the world, in Africa, in Europe, in the Caribbean, and throughout the United States. You should go to APSPUhuru.org. Freedom is something that we have to have, and we don't know what the white power is going to do next. And whatever they do next, it will be for them and not for us. And that's the thing that you must understand. Uhuru, APSPUhuru.org. Africa and African people must be free. Uhuru.